Hello. So, this is my good teaching mind map. As you can see, I have good teaching in the center, and I have my subcategories classroom management, lesson plans, learning theories, and curriculum. So, I'll start with the learning theories. So, I basically broke them down um, kind of by like person, I guess. So I have Wiggins, I have Vygotsky, Mihai, Csikszentmihalyi, and then these ones are more like categories or like practices. So critical pedagogy, aestheticism, and praxealism. So under each one, I kind of have what the big points are. So under Wiggins, obviously I have constructivism, which is constructing understanding through experience. And then I also have schema. And then under that, I have assimilation and accommodation. So that's basically what students are going to do with the information and how that relates to their schema. Um, have musical problems because that's something that Wiggins explored that we also explored in class. I thought that would be important to include. And then I have Vygotsky, so obviously he's big on the ZPD, the zone of proximal development. Also, instructional scaffolding. And also, I just kind of put that he's the father of social constructivism. Under Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, I know we didn't really talk about him that much, but his flow theory was really important, and that's about, how skill relates to how skill being balanced with a challenge. So obviously, if the skill is greater than the challenge, then students are bored. If the challenge is too great, then the students are gonna be overwhelmed, probably anxious. So you don't want that. So there's a balance there, and that's the flow theory. Under critical pedagogy, obviously we have the founder, Paulo Freire. We love him. Um, Also, critical ped is big on thinking, reflecting, and acting, obviously, and it also touches on this teacher-learner specific relationship. And then under aestheticism, I have the aesthetic experience and how aestheticism is all about emotions and feeling, and really like reacting to what you think and what you feel about something, about music specifically. And then praxealism, kind of like the easier one here. It's just students learn through actual making and observing of music, and then obviously they reflect back on that and what they learned from that. Okay, so then under curriculum, I have the Stouffer lesson sequencing that we did and the 6 steps that are included in that. I have Pestalozzi and his idea of principles of good teaching, and they're all kind of here. There's a bunch of them that I really like. For John Duke, I have his sequencing principles, so he had a different idea of sequencing, so that's all kind of in the curriculum part of things. So moving on to classroom management, we have student behavior and we have student misbehavior, and I have under here what those are. And I also included how misbehavior is purposeful and the different things that students seem to seek from it, like attention and power. So I have those there also. And then I also included the teacher response and what are some typical ways that the teacher can respond to misbehavior, and even good behavior and wanted behavior. So moving on to lesson plans, lesson plans are good to include different objectives. So I have the cognitive objectives, the behavioral objectives that what we talked about in class, how to define those, and the different aspects of those are included here. Under assessments, we have the big few that we talked about, like summative and formative, and the student and peer assessments that are different from evaluation. So I have that in there also. And then, of course, the biggest part of a lesson plan is complying with core standards that I found from like the NACME website and everything. So just a basic layout of those are on there. I didn't include every single standard because there's just too many. Okay, so thinking about the map as a whole, some big things that I related to are obviously Wiggins' constructivism. I related that to Vygotsky and his idea of social constructivism. They're both ideas on that students learn from experience. So I just linked those together. I also linked constructivism with praxialism because they both kind of say that students learn best by physically doing something. So those relate in that way. I related musical problems to thinking, reflecting, and acting because I wrote that students must use what they know to solve the task at hand. So when in critical pedagogy, students are given a problem, just like a musical problem. They have to think about the situation. They have to use what they know to try and solve the issue or the situation that they're given. And then once they think they've solved it, they reflect on it and on their answer. And then they actually go and act out and solve the problem. So musical problems work kind of the same way. They are a reflection of real life situations that students might encounter in a musical setting. And then they use what they know to try to come up with an answer the best they can. And then they think about if their answer actually worked or not, or if it actually applied or not. So I think those two relate really well. I'm moving on. I also related ZPD, the zone of proximal development, to the flow theory because they both talk about like levels of content difficulty and how difficult should the challenge be that the students can either reach a conclusion with some help, with no help, or is it too far beyond their reach of knowledge? So those two relate really well in deciding how difficult something should be for them in order to either figure it out or figure it out with guidance, or like I said, not even figure it out at all. It's too hard. The next thing I related is instructional scaffolding. I related that to sequencing principles, and it also could be related to Stauffer lesson sequencing because those are pretty similar. But those involve how materials should be taught. So scaffolding is more about what the teacher can give the students so that they can be successful with help and without help, and the tools they need to reach the answer by themselves. Sequencing, less about that and more about the steps that the teacher is going to take to teach the subject. But I think they're both really related in that you need to break down the content and really think about what steps you're going to put in before other steps and what things you're going to introduce before you introduce other topics. So they're both just steps and sequencing in what you're actually going to teach. So I think those are really related there. I also related musical problems to sequencing and good teaching because they're both introducing topics that cause students to really think about larger topics. So they reflect musical problems reflect real life situations, and so they have to use information they already knew, and it's all sequential. They have to use that information. They have to look at the steps at hand. They have to come up with a formulated answer, think about if it's correct. It's all just sequencing information and stacking it on top of each other. So that's why I said that sequencing and musical problems are related. I wrote here they include real-life musical situations, but it goes a little bit beyond that. Okay, so moving on, I related, I'll just start at the top. So I related teachers and learners under critical pedagogy to student behavior, and I guess teacher response, misbehavior, that's all included in there. Because they both really explore the different student-teacher relationships that exist within the classroom. So under critical pedagogy, teachers and learners really have to trust each other And the role of the teacher is to really guide the students so that they can figure things out and solve the problems by themselves. And under like student behavior and teacher response, it's important for students to really like comply with their teachers, but I think misbehavior is important because it shows that students aren't fulfilling the needs that they need to. So it's like it's a system of checks and balances, really. So that's how the two different roles exist. I thought they were pretty related, just in the fact that there are many different student-teacher relationships that exist in the classroom. So the next points I related are aestheticism, and I related that to student behavior also, because aestheticism is all about what emotions are brought upon by music and what you feel, and basically how things sound. Like, is it nice? Is it dissonant? So student behavior is basically emotions and feelings, psychological, emotional needs of students. So I think aestheticism works alongside of that, where it'll say a lot about a student, what kind of music they like to listen to, or what kind of music they think sounds nice, and what kind of music they don't necessarily like. So I think there's a big focus on student emotions and feelings with both topics, so that's why I related them. Also related are lesson plans and learning theories. This is a big one, a pretty obvious one, but definitely lesson plans will incorporate how material will be taught. So as a teacher, you get to decide what philosophies of learning theories that you think are best for your students in your class and what things you like as a teacher. So that's incorporating them in your lesson plans is just a really obvious way of saying what you like and what you don't like about educational philosophies. So they're definitely related. Another big thing that's obviously related are lesson plans and the curriculum, because lesson plans keep in mind the entire curriculum that is to be taught through the whole year. Yes, lesson plans are broken down by each day of each class period and what you're going to teach then, but overall they contribute to the larger topic of what you'll be teaching as a whole through the year, or whatever time period you have that you're teaching the class. But they definitely keep the curriculum in mind. And then, sequencing under curriculum, you definitely incorporate your sequencing in lesson plans, and that's the next connection, is lesson plans write out steps of sequencing. That's where sequencing is a topic, and, sure, you can look at the steps of sequencing, but you have to incorporate them in your lesson plans, and that's where you really write what you're sequencing and the steps you're going to take to teach that topic in your lesson plan, and you go back, and that's how you incorporate that into your lesson, by looking at your lesson plan and making it. So something else, some little connections I made that were pretty obvious, where I connected objective, so cognitive and behavioral, to the core art standards. So obviously your objectives have to reflect back to your standards. That's just what they have. You have to incorporate standards as an educator, you have to. So obviously some of these objectives and the even assessments are going to reflect back to that. Similarly, your assessments are going to be reflective of your objectives. So you're assessing students based on the different types of objectives that you created for them. That's how you assess. You can't, doesn't matter the way you assess them, but you can't really know what you're assessing if you don't have objectives, like you don't have goals for the students. So those are just quite clearly related. So this is my mind map. All of these topics combined really summarize what good teaching is. In ATM2 this year, I thought the class did a great job of teaching me things that I didn't really think about on becoming a teacher, and learning and just immersing myself into an actual middle school classroom was great practice, and I definitely got to input some of these theories and classroom management topics into the classroom, and it made me feel more like a teacher. So thank you for watching.